little ironic, don't you think, that a school principal, a former school principal, wouldn't know how to operate a fire alarm? It's not just ironic, it's downright unbelievable. But speaking of the state of education in our nation, let's look at schools in Illinois for just a sec. This is a new report. I don't care how often we say that the public education system in our country is A, an indoctrination center, and B, is failing students academically. When you see a statistic like this, it really makes you stop and think. Right now in the state of Illinois, 30 public schools have 0 students who can read at grade level. 0. 30 different schools have 0 students who can read at grade level. So this doesn't mean that they have a lot of students who are failing reading. It doesn't mean that there's one school where every single student, 30 schools, how does this even happen? How does this even happen? I'll tell you how this happens. This is something that I talk about in my book. When I talk about public education, we know that public education right now is completely corrupted with critical race theory and trans ideology, the 1619 Project, moral relativism, all of that stuff. We don't really need to establish that that's happening. We know that it is. But one of the most interesting tidbits that I came across when I was researching my book is that public schooling in the United States hasn't been mandatory the way that it is now for that long. Really not that long. Public schooling became mandatory. The first state to adopt it was actually in 1852. The state of Massachusetts made public schooling compulsory because at the time there was an influx of Catholic immigrants to our country, and the Protestant politicians in charge of Massachusetts wanted to indoctrinate the immigrant children in American values so that those children, the immigrant children, would be loyal to America first rather than the country of their birth. And they wanted to indoctrinate these immigrant children in Protestant values because, well, the centuries-old battle, the ongoing battle between Protestants and Catholics. And I realized as I was reading this that our education system actually was always intended. It is supposed to be used as an indoctrination center. It's not supposed to be this neutral reading, writing, and arithmetic center. That's not possible, right? You can't have children in your care for 8 hours a day, even if you're just teaching them academic subject, without imparting some sort of values. There's really no such thing as a value-neutral education. Yet, even though our education system was intended to indoctrinate, it was Republicans who, or at least it was Republicans who let go of that. It was Republicans who relinquished that, who surrendered it to the left. Somewhere between the time when public schooling became mandatory and now, Republicans just completely stepped back and Democrats were only too happy to step into that void and fill that with Democrat values. And I think that this is something that conservatives in the Republican Party need to grapple with, because it can sound edgy or unappealing or even immoral to say that our schools should be used as an indoctrination center. But that the reason that it sounds edgy or immoral is because we associate indoctrination with what the left is indoctrinating our children with right now, the critical race theory and the trans stuff. But indoctrination itself isn't necessarily immoral. It's actually a very ambiguous word. It's a morally neutral word. It's not good or bad in and of itself. It depends on what's being indoctrinated that determines whether it's moral or immoral. And right now, the Democrats are indoctrinating with immoral stuff, which means that the indoctrination is immoral too. But Republicans need to take back education and not just try to make it into some value-neutral reading, writing, arithmetic center. That's never going to happen. They need to take it back and start indoctrinating American civics and values and Judeo-Christian principles. It doesn't mean forcing kids to worship a God that their families don't choose to worship, but it does mean teaching the underlying morality, the underlying Judeo-Christian morality that underpins our entire society, that underpins not only our laws, but our culture and the function or the way that our government was set up. And I challenge conservatives in my book. I'm interested for you guys to read that chapter specifically because I challenge conservatives to stop thinking about our institutions the way that the Republican Party thinks about them. The Republican Party wants us to, quote unquote, get back to what they used to be. And they paint what they used to be as being this neutral apparatus, and they never were a neutral apparatus. Our institutions have never been neutral. It's just a matter of who was in charge of them. It used to be Republicans. It used to be pro-American people that were in charge of them. And so we thought of that as being neutral because those principles, American principles, your Judeo-Christian values seemed so normal to people that it didn't seem like indoctrination. But it is indoctrination, but it's the good kind. And I challenge conservatives, don't just try to return this to some obscure state of neutrality that never really existed. Take back this institution and use it to teach the next generation of children why America is good and the Judeo-Christian principles that underlie it, that make us good. If we don't do that, I'm not sure that it's worth having a public school system at all. And I know that this is one of my most based viewpoints even a lot of Republicans are hesitant to jump on this train with me, although you're all invited to climb on board. But if we are not using our public school system for positive indoctrination of American values and Judeo-Christian values, then what's the point of it? Because we're academically failing students. I mean, this statistic from Illinois is just jaw-dropping. 30 schools in Illinois have 0 students who can read it at grade level. So why are you sending your children there then? Are you sending them there because it's free daycare? Because children come out just with horrible social skills. They're bullied, they're ignored, they're neglected. They spend all of their time listening to being in this classroom just surrounded by peers their own age. They're socially stunted when they come out of public school. So it's academically failing students. It's producing socially stunted children. Oftentimes in inner cities, schools are a hub of gang violence and gang recruiting. If you're not at the same time, if there's not even the redeeming value of being taught American values and Judeo-Christian morals, then why do we even have the public school system? What purpose does it serve? If it's just a gigantic childcare apparatus, then we need to rethink our childcare apparatus, because we are at the point in our country where I wouldn't wish my worst enemy to send their child to a public school. It is a pit of snakes for children. A pit of snakes. And like I said, I unpack all of this in my book, and I hope you guys read that part, because I think that this is really key to Republicans not losing, because we're losing. We've been losing for 50 or 60 years. Everything the Republican Party has tried, the conservative movement has tried, has not worked, or we wouldn't be existing right now in this cultural insanity in which we are existing. So we have to be able to objectively look at, well, what have we done for the last 50 years that isn't working? And how can we readjust that? What have we gotten wrong, and how do we make it right? And I propose that solution in my book. So go to hideyourchildrenbook.com, hideyourchildrenbook.com.